Hey, witches!
Hi, hello, welcome back. The ice
We are.
cream truck's here.
Oh, well,
It's
I
70
went to.
degrees out, so okay.
Yeah, it's not that warm here. I think it's like in the 40s today. But I went the other day and got ice cream from. So, the Dollar Tree, have you checked out their freezer section lately
Yeah, it's
at the
actually
Dollar
pretty
Tree?
dope.
Right. Like, they have like the Snickers ice cream bars and like, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but Talenti gelato stuff.
Talenti is so fucking good. And let me tell you,
Yes!
this ain't the same Dollar Tree from my childhood. This is
No.
some, bullshit. Where the fuck was this shit when I wanted it the most?
Yes. So I went and like stocked up the freezer because I knew I was about to start my period. And anyway, so I have ice cream truck grade ice cream in my freezer right now.
Fuck yeah. Well,
Um,
okay. This ain't ice cream truck grade. This is like the wonky
better than
faced.
ice cream.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
no. This is like wonky faced SpongeBob kind of
SpongeBob.
ice cream
Yeah,
truck.
with the gumball eyes.
I think that one actually has like boozy pops on it too. But
That's amazing.
anyways, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a history episode. We are still working our way through Witchcraft, a History in 13 Trials by Marion Gibson. Um, I am obviously summarizing what she writes um, for these episodes and paraphrasing. I'm not, well, some of it I'm reading directly, but I'm giving all the credit to her. This chapter, um, some of it you've probably heard before because we are finally at Salem. We're going to get into the etymology of this person's name, but for now, this is the trial of Tituba, slavery and survival on the Salem frontier. I will not be referring to her as Tituba through this episode, but we'll get to that in a moment. So in this is the, everybody knows this story. In 1692, there were two young girls who lived with the Puritan minister, Samuel Parris. They started having violent fits and began to accuse women in their town of bewitching them. And we will talk more about that a little bit later. But we're first going to travel back and learn a little bit of the history about one of those accused women. So we're going to go back to Barbados and in the South.
Oh, what a beautiful place. Never
Well,
been.
not in this time. It's not.
Oh.
Um, in this time, Barbados is an island. It's a slave island. It's a slave trade island. That's all it's used for. There's slaves housed there. There's slave auctions there. And before I go on, I want to know what you were taught in school about Tituba and like what does she look like? Where is she from?
Well, I don't think I ever learned about her.
Yeah, so I did learn about her. But in my head,
Which is really surprising.
yeah, it is. Well,
Wait, like grade
we
school?
also, well, like high school.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Although
because
that
we
name
read The
sounds really
Crucible.
familiar. Oh!
Yeah. So in high school, I was taught that she was a slave, which she
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know that my high school teacher purposefully misled us in this, or if she was also misled and just didn't realize. Not all slaves in this time period were from Africa. Tituba is not black. She is not African.
She's
She is not white.
probably, I was gonna say, she's probably, not considered white, but like more
She's
like an
Native
islander.
American.
Oh.
Yeah. So, she's a native South American. So
Mm-hmm.
she is brown, but she is not from Africa. Um, And that is why I will not be referring to her as Tituba. So, a lot of the times, well, not a lot of the times, all the time, as an enslaved person, they don't have like a last name. They just have whatever name is given to them. Um, and a lot of the times it's um, a colonized name, like Mary, Hannah, John, Peter. And then their last name is their like their race. So Mary Black or Mary a Negro, like those would be how they refer to them. This one, however, this might be her real name or a version or of her real name, a really messed up version of her real name, probably. A lot
Definitely
of history
up.
books, yeah. So a lot of history books refer to her as Tituba, Tituba. But the UBA, a lot of historians and scholars have pointed out that the UBA ending is typically an African etymology thing for the ending of slaves from West Africa. So they suspect that slaveholders or slavers might have switched it to that ending just because that's what they were used to.
Mm-hmm.
The ending, so in a lot of the court records, it was written as Tatabe, which again, this is all them just guessing how it's spelled from what they're hearing. And so historians and scholars have come up with what is more likely, or in this book, it's referred to as the nearest approximation we have to a name possibly used by her to describe herself. And that is, and I'm going to say this wrong because I didn't re-look it up. I looked it up the other day, but Tatabe. 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 That's it.
It's like, I don't know.
I wrote it down. I just Tatabe. And so that's what we're gonna go with for this episode, Tatabe. So in any of those forms, however, her name suggests that she is a native South American. So in the paperwork from her witch trial, they do typically describe her as Native American, which is wild because then why were we taught that she was African? Wild. But these scholars dived into Native American tribes and things from the time to try to figure out more exact origins for her. Again, none of this is 100% for sure because we don't know. But this is the best guess that professionals and scholars in that era, experts, whatever, can come up with. So there is a people called the Arawak people. And they are called they call themselves the Titibatana. And they lived in a delta in South America in the 17th century. And a lot of the times, the Tetibetana women called themselves Tetibetado as like a group name. So kind of like Latina, like it'd be Tetibetado.
Potato.
And
That's how I'll
that
remember it.
could have been where Tatiba came from, like the name Tatiba. So if this is where she was from, then she was born and grew up in what is now Venezuela. Um, so Native South American culture was polygamous. So she would have grown up with multiple siblings, cousins, tons of people living together in the same hut. It would have been really hot in the summers because South America. Um, they slept in hammocks, cooled by the cool night air. The Arawak people were very gentle people. They didn't, they weren't like warriors. I mean, they had warriors, but they weren't like a warrior race. Um, they used narcotics in the form of smoked and chewed tobacco and a strong cassava based wine. So the point of all of that is to bring up how different her upbringing is from where she ends up in Puritan, Massachusetts. So, a lot of these people brought their knowledge and customs to the plantations where they were brought, typically sugar plantations in South America. And they kind of shared that thing. So her upbringing would not have been like a feminist or paradise or anything like that. But women in her culture were respected and more well taken care of than European cultures. Partially because when they get married, a husband became the subject of his wife's father. So if Tatabe had stayed in her native land, she would have eventually gotten married, and then her husband would have become part of her family. And also, if the husband displeased her, she could kick him out of her family home. So,
Yes.
right?
You displeased me. Goodbye.
Yes. So these people were hunter-gatherers. They were foragers. This is when they would encounter Europeans. So as they were out fishing and hunting for food for their people, typically along the rivers, they were taken by the Europeans who were also out hunting, but they weren't hunting animals. They were hunting people.
Yay.
A lot of these Native American girls and women were taken to be house slaves because they were stereotyped as good cooks, adaptive, cooperative, and unlikely to threaten colonists. So they're not as likely to fight back, basically. So they are the house slaves. So at some point before 1676, Tatabe was enslaved, basically kidnapped from someplace near her home and put onto a ship that was going to Barbados. She was dragged ashore there, and there's a lot of information about the Barbados settlement, about the cultural diversity there, but also it was a dangerous place to live. There were a lot of, I mean, this is where the slave trade is happening, so it's not a safe place. But this is where she's taken, and she is put up for auction, and eventually sent to Samuel Thompson's sugar farm.
Ugh.
Yeah. Samuel Thompson is a very young master, for lack of a better term, owner, basically, shithead. And it's quite likely that he had some kind of terminal illness because he died at the age of 25. And it seemed like he knew he was dying because he had sold most of his land and people and homes by the time he died. So this includes Tatabe. She was sold to Nicholas Prideaux. But in the inventory, because that's what this is, they literally have an inventory of all the items sold, and she is listed as a child at this point. So she was first sold most likely to Nicholas Prideaux, and then she is sold again to Samuel Paris. He also is living on Barbados at this time. He had attended Harvard University in Massachusetts until 1673 until his father died and he inherited the Barbados lands of his family, which were worth around $7,000, which at the time was like a huge amount of money. Samuel Paris, though, was not interested in staying in Barbados. After he took possession of his father's assets, he wanted to return to Massachusetts. So he sold all of that land. And by 1680, moved back to Massachusetts. At that time, he held only one slave and one servant, neither of whom were named, but based on later events, we know that Tatabe was one of them. And she would frequently later in her witch trials refer to my own country as the place where she supposedly learned magic. But it's not, we're not sure whether she meant South America or Barbados, but either way, she is now far, far, far from that land. So they're in Massachusetts. They are in Boston. For about 10 years. Samuel gets married. He has children with his wife Elizabeth. His children are Thomas, Betty, and Susanna. Tatabe was reclassified as a servant because technically in Massachusetts, enslaving Native Americans was illegal. So in title, she changes from slave to servant, but her new title meant nothing. She was not free, and even if she was free, she has no idea where she's at, and she has no money or anything to get her back to her own homeland. Plus, at this point, if you think about it, she's lived with this family for 10 years and helped raise their children. She probably is having a bit of Stockholm syndrome in the fact that she loves the children that she's helped raise, and probably doesn't necessarily want to leave them. Plus, she was taken from her own family so young that with all the trauma she's been through, it's likely she doesn't remember exactly where she's from. So, we know that Samuel Paris was a businessman because he had these, his family had these sugar plantation lands and everything, but he wasn't interested in that. Once he sold all of that off, he decided to become a Puritan clergyman. And the villagers in Salem have heard of him, and they invite him to come there and lead their church because they've heard of him and they think that their values align. So they had just built a new church with a pulpit and all of that, but now with Samuel here, they want to create a new exclusive, like members only group within the Fuller Church. And the inner circle offers membership only to the most radical believers. And those radical believers are the ones that are it's not their mission to bring together a community. It is their mission to cleanse and purge the church. And if you wouldn't commit to be in this like kind of psycho group he's built, then he would not baptize your children. Nope.
And your children would be going to hell.
Yep. Even though that's not what the book fucking says, but that's fine. Um, but yeah, so Tatabe is already an outsider in this town because she does not look like the other people. She does not sound like the other people. But also, she is not a part of this inner circle because she's a slave, right? So, like, she can't be. But also, because she's not, we're going to spit on you. Um, there was another Native American in the parsonage. They called him John Indian because they gave him the name John, and they called Native Americans Indians at the time. So that was his race, was his last name. At some point, there is potentially a marriage between Tatabe and John, um, but we don't know much about that or if it's even for sure a thing. But it's kind of likely because if they forced them to be married, then they could share a room and a bed, so it would be cheaper for the owners to, you know, keep them. Anyway, the girls or the kids of the Paris family were used to the Tatabe and John being Native Americans, but some of the other girls in town who were friends with these children are refugees from the this is in quotes Indian War in Maine. They had seen neighbors shot or clubbed to death by angry Wabanaki people whom the colonists had sold illegally into slavery. So they have some trauma themselves and had to flee from Native American people. And even though Tatabe is not related to these North American Native Americans, she's still kind of lumped in with them by the white people. So after the Indian War, a new family member joins the Paris household, which is Samuel Paris's 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams. Anyone who has followed Salem knows who Abigail Williams is. In January 1692, Abigail falls ill, and then her 9-year-old cousin, Betty, does too. And at first, it seems like their illness is like something normal, like cramps or a fever.
Period.
Yeah, possible. Well,
Pregnancy.
probably not the 9-year-old. Well, maybe.
There's some
It could
people.
happen that young.
It might have actually happened that young just because of, like,
Poor health and
yeah. Well, and I know that their lifespans were
shorter.
so
Yeah.
shit got moved later. Because there's people nowadays that are not starting their period until a little later, and it's like apparently perfectly healthy.
Yeah. So either way, they were like started out as like a normal illness, but soon their symptoms became alarming. They started twitching and shrieking as if in pain. They contorted into strange positions. Their limbs would go at unnatural angles. They would say they were being bitten and pinched, and something outside their bodies seemed to be hurting them. In this community that believed in devils and evil and all of that, immediately they were like, it's witchcraft. So they start, they call a doctor. The doctor is like, yep, they're definitely bewitched. So the minister, Samuel Paris, and his church members started doing sermons, prayers, fasts, all kinds of, religious-based methods of healing. And it's obviously not working. One church member decided that she was going to discover the witch who was affecting them. Mary Sibley decided to use folk magic to supplement her prayers.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's how you start a witch hunt.
But like, what? So she asked John Indian to make a witch cake. which would be a mix of cereal flour with the urine of the bewitched, baked and fed to a dog to carry away the curse. And John Indian, again, is a slave, so he just does what they tell him to do. However, Samuel Parris finds out about this, and reports on March 27th Mary in church for giving direction, quotes, direction to my Indian man in an unwarrantable way to find out witches by making of a cake. He says that you can't go to the devil for help against the devil. And now she has set Satan loose in the village. And as it happens in these situations, now more girls and young women begin to have fits, writhing, screaming, and crying. In late February 1692, Tatabe is accused of witchcraft by Abigail and Betty. Abigail is the one kind of instigating all of this, and eventually,
Isn't Abigail
Betty's
the one that
name,
like slept with whatever his name is, John?
yeah,
What the
that
heck?
doesn't really get talked about in this book, but yes, in the Crucible, yes.
The thing is, Tituba sounds so familiar. I just don't remember anything about it.
Yeah. But yeah, so later Betty's name gets taken off of those documents, and Abigail is the only one to sign them. But she's signing them with her mark because she can't write her own name because she's a woman in the 1600s. A lot of the details during this time went unrecorded because, it does. But the main charges are clear. Both Abigail and Betty accused Tatuba of bewitching them in conspiracy with Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. They say that these people drifted into their rooms and assaulted them as apparitions, and then they also accuse other villagers later, such as Martha and Giles Corey, Rebecca Nurse, Bridget Bishop, George Jacobs, Elizabeth and John Proctor, and many others. And Elizabeth and John Proctor are the ones that you are referring to because Abigail tries to have a relationship with John Proctor.
John Proctor's like, no, you heathen, you're bewitching.
Yeah. And also, you're a fucking child. So, there's that. Because literally at this time, she's like 11 or 12.
He's just trying to sow a seed.
And then at this point, instead of bringing in a magistrate or going to the courts, Samuel Parris decides he's going to just interrogate Tatabe. And how that goes. So then they do the whole watching thing, where they just watch them and they imagine that they've signed a covenant with Satan. Abigail said she'd actually witnessed this process. She had been haunted by Martha Corey, who came as an apparition and attempted to make her put her hand to the devil's book. George Jacobs also appeared as an apparition and tried to make her put her hand on the devil's book. And then sometimes the devil came himself in the form of a black man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Damn.
And then, so eventually, at the end of February 29th, must have been a leap year, 1692.
That's witchcraft.
They were actually arrested for formal interrogation. They were summoned to Nathaniel Ingersoll's Inn by the magistrates John Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin, but their interrogation was moved to the meeting house so more villagers could participate. Abigail, Betty, Elizabeth Hubbard, and Ann Putnam were there and put on their show. They were screaming and groaning and twitching and doing all the things.
They had a
And
vibrator on. They had special underwear.
you know,
Pinky.
but but instead of asking Tatabe if she had done this or what, or if she had done this, they asked her why she was hurting the girls.
Because they bitches.
Well, and she's like, I can't tell when the devil works. Like, she's like, I don't know. I'm not doing this. And she brings the devil into it by saying, I can't tell when the devil works. And then they're like, have you never seen the devil? And she's like, well, the devil came to me and bid me to serve him. But it wasn't me. There are 4 other women who are hurting the accusers. And then she throws out, a couple of names and says that they wanted her to help them, but she would not. And they keep asking her, did you hurt the children? Did you hurt the children? And she keeps saying no at this point. But then she finally gives in and says that the witches told her that if she did not listen and do what they said, they would hurt her. And eventually, Tatabe says yes, she did hurt the girls. As in all of these trials, her confession was inevitable. They had her do watching and walking, where she had to stay walking for days straight, and they're basically mentally and physically torturing her. And in this case, after the watching and walking, some of the accused come out injured. Sarah Good comes out covered in blood from the elbow to the wrist. And they say that this was inflicted in spirit as her apparition walked out to attack her victims. But we all know that's bullshit. And so someone who was watching or doing this torture to them hurt her. So these were 2 white women, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. And this is how they were being treated. So the slave Tatabe really had no hope. So she breaks down and she apologizes and promises she will never hurt the children again. And that she was threatened by the witches who came to her as apparition and told her to kill the children or they would do worse to her. Of course, when she was physically examined by the innkeeper, Hannah Ingersoll, to see if witch marks could be found, they were. And also, they found marks on her legs that confirmed her story that Sarah Good had pinched her on the legs to make her hurt the girls. So that was kind of weird. But I'm wondering, honestly, just speculating here, if that wasn't from the torture they received from the men while they were doing the watching.
Yeah.
This goes on and on and on. More of the same stuff. And once she finally breaks under the pressure, Tatabe starts having fits herself. And she has turned on Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, which this then grants her the status of an accuser, which could save her life.
Mm-hmm.
There is a final interrogation. She's questioned for a second time on March 2nd. She was asked what Satan told her, and she replied that he told her that he was God and that she had to serve him, and that she refused, saying that she had to ask her master, meaning Samuel Paris, but he never gave up, and so eventually she listened. And said that the night before Abigail fell ill, the witches had a Sabbath in Samuel's house. And then that's when the demands from the other witches began, that she hurt the children. And she says in her testimony, I would not hurt Betty. I loved Betty. Betty being one of these children that she has helped raise. She was then imprisoned on March 7th to await trial. A special court, known as the Court of Oyer and Terminer, was set up by Sir William Phipps, who was the colony's governor. And they started these trials. Tatabe's indictment stated that in late 1691, she wickedly, maliciously, and feloniously a covenant with the devil did make, and signed the devil's book with a mark like a C, by which wicked covenanting with the devil, the said Tatabe, again spelled wrong, is become a detestable witch. However, that indictment was not drawn up until May 9th, 1963, over a year later, after her arrest. So she was sent in June 1692 to Boston prison with Sarah Good. Sarah Osborne had previously died in jail in Salem. Tatabe's in prison. She's there for over a year, while all of the other people are convicted and executed. 19 were executed. Most of them were hanged. Giles Corey famously refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty and suffered the cruel death appointed as a punishment for that. He was pressed to death by having rocks loaded onto his body.
Damn.
And Giles Corey was really old for this time. Like, I want to say he was like in his 60s or something, which for the time period was really old. But for whatever reason, Tatabe was not tried.
Witchcraft.
Most likely because, well, maybe, but most likely because she was considered too useful a witness against the other. Time ends up working to her advantage in this, because by mid-1693, there were 200 people awaiting trial.
And not one was Tatabe.
Right. And the majority of Massachusetts at this point, because remember, this is still a colony, and 200 people for that time is a lot of people. There weren't that many people. So Massachusetts, like, general population is like, something's not right here. Yes, we know about demonology and we believe in it, but there can't be this many witches. That makes no sense. And also, the trials were becoming unsustainable because there were so many people being imprisoned, and they weren't able to process these people fast enough. Sound familiar? Anyway, let me not jump on a soapbox right now. So there's a new court put together to try the remaining cases under a revised anti-witchcraft law. So the old law said that anyone or an accused witch hath or consulteth with a familiar spirit. Very vague, very basic. The new law is based more clearly on the English witchcraft law of 1604. And it confirms that it is illegal to use, practice, or exercise any invocation or conjuration of any evil or wicked spirit, or to consult, covenant with, entertain, employ, feed, or reward any evil or wicked spirit, or for any intent or purpose. So her crime, her supposed crime, alleged crime, was covered by both of these laws. But when her indictment was presented to a grand jury at the new court, the jury rejected it. The jury's job was to look at the charges and make sure that all of the relevant information and evidence was present to try the indicted person. And the jury foreman, his name was Abraham Hasseltine, he wrote ignoramus, which meant we don't know or we don't approve, on the back of her indictment. And this meant she would not go on to trial. There is no reasoning given. We don't know why they decided not to charge her, although it was speculated that it's potentially because the date the offense happened and the date of the indictment was over a year. And so it was just kind of thrown out for that reason. So amazingly, this trial where they throw out her indictment is her only trial. Other convictions continue around her, but there were no more executions. Anyone condemned was reprieved by the governor because he was like, I don't trust the courts anymore. This is ridiculous. Bereaved families started speaking out, and ministers admitted that maybe they had made mistakes, and people were like, oh fuck, this was bad. This was wrong. We did bad. And people who had family members executed because of this bullshit petitioned for Samuel Parris's removal of the church. So he left Salem in disgrace. There were, and let me say this loud for the people in the back, these white families who had their family members murdered unjustly were paid retribution by the government. Let me say that again. These people who were wrongly convicted and executed, their families were paid retribution from the government. It has happened in the past, so don't act like it's crazy when you hear about it now. Now, let me continue off my soapbox. There was a heavily edited and misspelled note from the Salem prison keeper written sometime after May 9th, 1693. And this is the last written evidence we have of Tatabe when her trial was over. In this note, the prison keeper is pleading with the court to pay the food bill of the witch suspects during their time in jail. And Tatabe's name is the first on the list of detainees. And she is referred to as Tatabe Indian. The note explains that she has been in prison for a whole year and several months, costing the prison over 4 pounds. Dang it. That's so much. I know in the time it probably was, but like still. Yeah. And that the debt was eventually paid, but not for sure by who. Whether it was Samuel Parris or someone else. There are some suspicions that maybe she was sold to pay for her jail fees, and that could be true. However, remember, as we said earlier, first of all, there's no slave market in Massachusetts, and it is illegal in Massachusetts to sell Native Americans into slavery. And it would have cost a lot of money to transport her somewhere else to be sold. And because of this trial and her notoriety, it would be hard to find someone likely to buy her unless they hadn't heard of her. So it's possible that she was set free at that point. More than likely, she was probably sold to another family or person. But we don't really know. We know she survived her witch trial. She was freed from prison, and we just have to kind of hope that she was able to have a better life after that.
Yeah.
But there's not any like actual written evidence of that. But that is Tataba's story, or a very the best that we to our knowledge, based on the few records about her, um, and all of the misspelling in
Yeah.
her in the court documents make it hard to know for sure. But that is it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you learned a little bit about, his story. But until next time.
Bye.